our last speaker, Jayne Fleener. Dr. Fleener has had many different experiences throughout her long career. She has studied philosophy, where she focused on alternative logics for artificial intelligence for early computer science applications, taught advanced placement computer science and calculus at the high school level, and was an early adopter of chaos mathematics and complexity theories for education and educational research methods. She began her higher education career as a mathematics teacher, educator at the University of Oklahoma. She left Oklahoma University to become dean at Louisiana State University College of Education, and then came to North Carolina State University as dean of their College of Education. Since 2015, when she returned full-time to teaching and research, Dr. Fleener has been working with futurists and community leaders, focusing on developing futures literacy and social transformation for new ways of thinking. Her research spans a variety of fields, including mathematics, mathematics education, teacher and STEM education, adult education, and futures. She has her undergraduate degree in philosophy from Indiana University and 3 graduate degrees from UNC Chapel Hill, including a master's in philosophy, an MAT in mathematics, and a PhD in mathematics education. She is a boundary spanner committed to working across fields for future transformations. Jayne?
Thank you so much. And I had forgotten what I had written in my introduction, and it's interesting because I wanted to begin by talking about the fact that I see my presentation as a nice bridge, both from the presentations that have occurred, but then as a bridge to how you change. And so I'm going to be building on some of the themes, and real quickly, I listed some of the words that came out of the 2 previous presentations that are going to be really emergent in my presentation. The issue of hope, by the way, came up actually in someone's self-introduction for the words that they were describing they wanted out of this session. And my presentation is going to talk about hope and heart, and humanity, and coherence, and values, and sustainability, and systems, and transformation, and new social contracts, and ethics, and what it means to be human, and unlearning. And I'm going to be doing that from the perspective of work and identity, and raising the question of how do we change? And I'm going to do that in 15 minutes. I think one of the questions that drives my presentation is, who are we? And more importantly, who are we becoming? And this is in the context of virtual augmented reality, the metaverse, the technological impacts of cybernetics, biometrics, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, nanotechnologies that have changed not only our workplace, but who we are, biomedicine, augmented human. And so as I explore the world of work, it really fundamentally is a question about who we are and where are we going, and what is our identity. I build off of the Millennium Project report on the future of work and technology 2050. And so you all have a good reading list from these 3 presentations of the different reports you need to go to. What I like about this report, first of all, it's very comprehensive in the sense that it was a 3-year project. It started out surveying futurists, educators, community leaders, politicians, and asking about the future of work and technology. Then after that, it developed scenarios, and it looked at commonalities across 26 countries where they had different people working on scenarios about the future of work. And after they developed the scenarios, they sort of went through it a 3rd time and developed 96 recommendations of what they projected to be the future of work and technology. The reason I'm talking about the process is I think the process was itself an exciting model of how you involve multiple people across many countries for thinking about some significant topics about the future. I then took the report and looked at it from an educator's perspective to understand the implications of the future of work and technology for education and for learning. And some of the things that were very clear from this report included the fact that meaningfulness is going to become and is already becoming very important for work. Work becoming not just what you do to make a living, but tied to self-actualization. Social contributions increasing in importance, not only from the perspective of meaningfulness of work, but actually getting paid for the kind of work that makes social impact and a difference. Also, I found it very interesting, a lot of emphasis on increase in self-employment. And as an educator, thinking, how do you prepare people not only to assume a role in the workforce, but how do you prepare people to be self-employed and social entrepreneurs? So the learning needs that all of these results sort of suggest are the need for lifelong learning. And lifelong learning is especially important from the perspective of something called pervasive learning. Pervasive learning is a term that has recently been coined, and it means learning at the speed of need. And I like the flow of that, learning at the speed of need. And that is especially enhanced by the availability of technological resources, but it suggests that our idea of front-loading education and making sure everything is in K-12 education is really disrupted. And it requires different skills than knowing your math and knowing your language arts, but how do you have the learning to learn skills that allow for this pervasive learning to occur? That means much more of an emphasis on the skills needed for informal learning and a de-emphasis on a lot of the skills that are necessary in formal learning. It also means understanding how to use technology and your environment, including other people, for augmented learning. And this is all a part of this emerging world of work where there are increased demands for creativity, collaboration, and flexibility, especially as technology assumes its role in taking away some of the drudgery of the workforce. And so one of my questions as an educator is, how do we prepare for and change our ideas about the world of work? So not just how do we, prepare students, but how do we change in our thinking about the world of work? Another report that I think is relevant here that is something to add to your reading list is the Brookings Institute's report on the future of work in the developing world. And I only mention it here briefly because it brings up many of the ideas in the Millennium Project report about the impact and increased use of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and automation of the workforce. It talks specifically about some of the disruptions of work and work weeks, and even the fact that some people are not going to be working. And, so the role of universal basic income, and then what do you do for people to meaningfully engage when they're no longer having their identities tied to jobs. And so I'll just leave that as something for you to consider. One other thing I want to build on is the idea of how our values are changing. And I really like how Andy Hines in one of his blogs sort of talked about the value changes as a society we're undergoing. We're moving away from the traditional ideas of following the rules and having standard achievement to really these ideas of meaningfulness, value, and then ultimately making a difference. So when you talk about how do you change, I think metaphors are really valuable. And I've spent a long time developing chaos and complexity metaphors. And I remember being challenged once by someone who said, metaphors are only as good as people's experience with the metaphors you present. And so chaos and complexity metaphors weren't working for a lot of people. And so I want to present a metaphor that we're going to build on real briefly called the backwards bicycle.
Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. You've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something. That damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill and I was really proud of it. Everything changed though when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Sandlin. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go, the better. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it.
So I'm going to skip ahead here. So he takes this backwards bike on tour and he shows a lot of different people, trying to learn to ride this backwards bicycle. And they can't do it. They can't unlearn the ideas that they have about how to ride a bike. And so let me move forward to here real quickly.
So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm and I would wreck. But at least I could ride it. My son is the closest person to me genetically, and he's been riding a normal bike for 3 years. That's over half his life. I wanted to know how long it would take him to learn how to ride a backwards bike, so I told him if he learned how to ride a backwards bike, he could go with me to Australia and meet a real astronaut. Are you gonna give up?
No.
Go ahead. This is how it starts. Look at this. This is such a big deal. Get up, you got it. Did you see his brain get it? So in how many weeks have we been doing this? 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, he did something that took me 8 months to do, which demonstrates that a child has more neuroplasticity, am I even saying that right, than an adult. It's clear from this experiment that children have a much more plastic brain than adults. That's why the best time to learn a language is when you're a young child.
Okay. So you get the idea, and I'm hoping that as you're watching this, you've had times when you've experienced that click where you've changed how you think about something. And my question is, how do you change your ideas about things? And as educators, we dictate the future of education in some respect. We ought to be listening to our kids a little bit more. But one way you do disrupt how you think about anything is by changing your metaphors. And I think there are a lot of social metaphors that need to be changed in order to really have the kinds of changes we need about the future of education that will really prepare people for the kind of workforce and the kind of work they need to have in the future. Because so much of our identity right now is still wrapped up into the work we do. And so the idea that hard work and rugged individualism and work is serious business needs to change. The ideas that success is achievable for all is something that Noah brought up with respect to, we have huge inequities that need to be addressed. And then again, the fact that our identity is so tied up to the work that we do. So not only changing those metaphors, but changing the dominant metaphors in society. And so when we think about the future of education, one thing I appreciate about these conversations that are happening in this convening is that we're looking at these challenges from a social systems perspective. We're looking at them as larger than just an education issue. And so some of the metaphors that we have that dominate the narratives of our society are going to prevent us from having the kind of changes we need in society and with education until we disrupt the ideas that money and power should dictate everything, that science and technology are the only ways to save the planet, that everyone has their place, or that bigger is better. Of course, the bigger is better and growth is unlimited idea. To me, New Zealand is a great example where they have challenged the idea of gross national product as a measure of societal success in favor of the idea of happiness as a measure of societal success. So they're fundamentally trying to change their societal narratives. When we talk about anticipating the future, we often think of it from the perspectives of prediction and optimization. How do we control the future? How do we optimize possibilities for the future? But I think what you've heard in these 3 sessions is also, how do we shape the future? How do we create emergent futures? How do we transform society? And what I like to add to all of those futures anticipatory mindsets is, what are the ethical reasons for doing so? And what are the underlying ethics? And so that's something that's very important to me. So back to the video, that knowledge does not equal understanding. I think as we go into our groups, being able to talk about this from the perspective of knowing that our knowing isn't enough, that we have to have that switch. We have to have that bicycle moment where we unlearn and uplearn in order to really make the kind of changes that need to happen. And so when we think about our educational futures, we can't do that without understanding what our purposes are, who we are going to be in the future, and ultimately even why we exist.